Okay, good morning, everybody. Um, you're all currently muted, so you won't be able to speak to me, but we can speak to you. I'm going to hand over now to Clive Brady, Chairman of the BWA.
Thank you, Graham. Morning, everybody. Not quite. I'm not clear just how many are with us this morning, but whoever is, then very much welcome to what is a bit of a departure for us as the BWA with our webinar program, as some of you will be familiar with. But what we're going to talk about today, in particular, Auditel and William and David are going to outline is very much what is a global issue that I think our members need to have some awareness of and understanding of, and that's what today is about. Is raising that knowledge and understanding, which fits with what we are doing and our direction of travel is as a BWA, which is educating, training, and advising. So this very much sits into that profile, but is a departure. Hopefully you'll get quite a bit out of this. I'm hoping to. And in our discussions prior to this webinar, then I've learned a lot already from both William and David. So the plan is for both of the guys to run through their set slides. Graham's going to capture, use the chat profile, please, or functionality to raise any questions. Graham's going to capture those, and then we'll address those, and William and David will address those in the Q&A a bit later. So please feel free to ask any questions you have. I think, Graham, you're recording. Are we recording the session for future use?
Yeah, so the session's being recorded currently, and like Clive said, you're all muted at the moment. But when it gets to the questions, I can unmute people from this side. So please put your questions in the chat box or raise your hand at the end if you do have a question and want to speak.
Great. Thanks, Graham. Without further ado, then, I'll hand over to David and William and welcome Auditel to you all today. Thanks, David. William.
All right. Thank you, Clive. Graham. Yeah, my name is William. This is David, one of my colleagues here. And thank you for joining the webinar. What we're going to try and do is demystify a few things about carbon. So I'm going to bring up the presentation. So it should be there any second now. Okay, so you should be able to see a co-branded Auditel BWA starter slide. See that, yeah? All good, thanks. So, so introduction to carbon management, footprinting and the reduction planning. First off, organizations need to understand that globally there are actually 17 goals for the climate action. We operate mainly in the climate action section, which is number 13 there. We touch on number 7 when we get involved in reduction plans with companies. So you've measured, you know where you are, and you want to reduce, and then so we then get involved in that side of things. And clean energy. We also do digital twinning projects with businesses which have a similar operations to other businesses that we've maybe worked with, so we can digitally twin those and speed the process up. And then section 12 there, when we get involved in the procurement side of the business that we do, because we also have a cost reduction and procurement management side to what we do. So we're going to talk a little bit about terminology. You probably read about these, but a lot of people don't fully understand what the difference are between them. I think nowadays a lot of people do. Definitely a year or so ago, possibly not. So carbon neutral, it's balancing carbon output and offsetting. Now, unfortunately, there are some companies over the last few years that have been caught out a bit with this, and it's kind of been tagged with a bit of a greenwashing element. Because companies, what they've done is they've just gone out and bought offsets. They haven't made any attempt to reduce their carbon at all, and they've just tried to offset it, which is not what is the correct way to do things, or what the government wants you to do either. The main thing to do if you really want to help is get to net zero first. So this is done by measuring and reducing your emissions, and then if you want to go for neutrality, then you can try for carbon neutral. But the process must be net zero, then carbon neutral, and that's where the big differences are in the terminology there. And of course, there is zero carbon, which I don't think will ever happen. Certainly not with the technology available at the moment. But the terminology is there, zero carbon, but it's not used by anybody at this time. So carbon, CO2. CO2 is the most common term used, carbon. Now, we're not looking around for bits of carbon. There are actually 7 gases that make up the emissions that are being measured towards the damage being done. So for them, people are aware of. Others are a little bit less used, but if you look there on the screen, you can see the multipliers times 265, times 6,500, all up to times 23,500, and that is the amount of extra tons to 1 carbon that damage that gas will do. So you've got nitrous oxide. It's got a common, laughing gas used as anesthetic. Propellant. It's could be used in motor vehicles as well. Commonly more associated with hot rods, that sort of thing. You see it on TV where they press the button, off they go. Hydrofluorocarbons is a more common one. From refrigerants, air conditioning, heat pumps, and used in some fire protection and solvents as well. Perfluorocarbon, easy for me to say, that one. For water, it's also water repelling on textiles, grease resistant paper, non-stick packaging, those sort of things on that one there. Sulfur hexafluoride, a little bit easier to say that one. Don't call that. So using electrical power systems, high voltage electrical insulation. So can be fairly common around, but as you can see, the damage you can do if it gets released into the atmosphere is quite horrific. Compared to just 1 ton of CO2, it's 23,500 tons of CO2 equivalent to 1 ton. Then we have the nitrogen trifluoride used to remove silicon and silicon compounds in manufactured semiconductor devices, LCD displays, that sort of equipment. So there's, as you can see, 7 gases. We use the common term carbon, and these all are put into the TCO2e carbon dioxide equivalent. And that's just a little bit on the different gases. Slight little chemistry lesson there for everybody. So then we move on to the scoping. Again, another slide or infographic that you've possibly seen going around. There are different versions of this one involving scopes 1, 2, and 3. Oh, pardon me. So scopes 1 and 2, they're fairly easy to measure and calculate, as they are direct emissions from your operation of your business. These, generally can be tricky to work out depending on the type of business, but the easier of the scopes to work out, shall we say. So, but scope 3, where it gets a little bit more complicated, as organizations, depending again on the type of business that you are, you can produce up to 15 different emission factors. So before you can even measure any of these, you need to set your boundaries, which is just a bit more of a different, more in-depth conversation, but we won't go there today on boundaries. So also scope 3 emissions can be up to 70% of a company's overall carbon emissions. So you've got few people are happy working at the scopes 1 and 2, like for SECR, where it's 1 and 2 and your grey fleet. And scope 3, if you can imagine an iceberg, it's like that 1 and 2 are the bit you can see sticking out of the water. Scope 3 is that huge piece that you can't see. And that's where things can get really complicated when it comes to working those out. It's not impossible to work out if you know what you're looking for and you've got the right calculations. This could all be worked out for you. Now, what a lot of companies like to work towards are certifications, verifications. So past 2060 was the carbon neutrality one that a lot of companies have been aiming for over the last few years. That's being ending at the end of this year and moving to the 16048, which is the neutrality classification there for an ISO. If you want to do carbon net zero, which is what a lot of companies aim for, that's the 16064, which is the most common one. But again, ISO now being introduced, ISO standards now being introduced as opposed to the BSI. So we moved on to principles of carbon accounting. When anyone conducts any form of carbon accounting, it's really important to adhere to these five principles. Otherwise, you may struggle to get any form of verification. So it's all got to be, the relevance has got to be there to your emissions, your business. The accuracy has to be spot on. It has to be complete. You can't leave a bit out just because it's complicated. It still has to be done. You've got to be consistent as well with what you do. Process consistency so that a verifier can look at it and understand what's happening. And I've called above all else transparency. Don't try and hide anything. Again, all that bit's complicated. It comes a bit into line with the completeness. You can't kind of sweep it under the carpet, and we'll not do that bit. Don't try and manipulate figures, I think is another way of putting it, for the transparency side of things. You've got to be transparent, complete, and accurate. If you want to see any form of verification towards ISO, or even just for a carbon footprint, the verifier has to be able to see all of these principles put into place when you're doing your carbon accounting. So a carbon footprint, a good report should be about 12 pages, plus a summary sheet for social media marketing purposes. The benefit to business that has a complete verified carbon footprint can be huge, from attracting like-minded business partners, customers looking to engage with companies that are showing that they've got an interest in sustainability, green issues. Suppliers as well, supply contracts. You now get what we call supply chain pressure, where you have businesses already creating carbon footprints, but to be able to complete their carbon footprint, they need, if you're doing business with them, they will need to know a portion of your emissions as well to complete their carbon footprint. So you can see the crossover. And this has already been witnessed by myself and colleagues where companies are not winning contracts because they don't have any emission reporting. So this is probably the main one that's going to drive a lot of companies towards reducing carbon footprints, so that you can all help each other with the completion. So this is an example of what your top end source could be, broken down to these types, the different types there which produce the emissions, and then it's the calculation involved. So you need to know the source so that you can look at the type from that source, and then you know what calculation to use based on those headings there to produce the CO2e factor to use on the report. And then we go into the journey. So you've started the journey. You're doing your measuring, you're doing your calculating, and this shows a journey for an organisation involved in the carbon reporting and beyond, become potential industry leaders in their sector. Creating footprints, you've got supply chain there, procurement decisions, all the way to reaching to be established as maybe a sector leader for the carbon reporting. So producing a yearly footprint report, some companies are happy to do this, and this is what we would call, say, an established business where they've done what they need to do, they've got a good process in place year on year for producing their carbon footprint report, and they're happy to do that. That's what their aim was to get to, and they want to carry on with their business. Other organizations may want to push on and reach market leader status. So that, you know, they're heading towards carbon net zero. They want to get to carbon neutral, and these are all the things on there that they would look at and look to improve and to reduce that carbon output. So now we'll look at different types of data quality that are out there. So to have a report that you can confidently advertise, your data quality needs to be high for verification purposes. Anyone, as you can see there on the right, there's an uncertainty level little bar there with an unhappy face at the bottom to happy and smiley, all good on the right. So anyone using spend analysis is pretty much wasting their time and money, to be honest. This type of data, it can never be verified, as each supplier, customer pays potentially different amounts of money for the same product. So you can see why that analysis can be wildly inaccurate. So unfortunately, it can never be verified. Also, estimated data, as we go from 5 to level 4. Estimated data is not great either. If you're looking for verification, you really need to be looking for level 3 and upwards, where you've got direct activity data and you're using generic information that the government has supplied that you can use on certain emission factors, and then all the way up to the top there, where you've got measurements occurring at chimney stack status. You know, it's measuring it as it's coming out right there and then. So this is just a scenario showing why the better data, the better the outcome towards a carbon report, and what can happen with the wrong weight, the unknown size of HGV. So you've got a ton going 168 kilometers, and we know the calculation, so we come up with 0.04 carbon equivalent. So then we have the second scenario, we're not sure on the weight, we know the distance, it's the same. We're not, again, sure on the exact HGV. We think the weight is around about, we think we filled it up. So the result can end up, as you can see there, as being more, because you always have to use the highest calculation. If you're having to, I suppose guess is the wrong word, but if you're having to use a generic term, you must use the highest one. So this is where better data, better results. So as you can see there, there's quite a difference. And it equals 375% increase in what carbon you think you're producing. This can have much bigger repercussions further down the road, as we will cover off. So you've got the same truck, it's done that journey 100 times, and using the exact data requirement, we've got 40 tons a CO2 equivalent that we can put on the report. Now, using lower grade data, it can be out by quite a lot, like I said, 375%. So that same journey without the correct data comes out at 150 tons. Now, this further down the line, as I was saying, if you're looking for carbon net zero, the next step is neutrality. Now, carbon neutrality, once you get that far down the line, then will involve offsetting purchases. And this is where it can get expensive if you've not calculated this bit correctly and you've had to use generic terminology rather than exact data. Isn't it? The generic is there to be used. The government has stated you can use it. This is an example of how much it can cost you in the long run, though. So the better the quality of the data, you can reap the rewards later, should we say. So science-based targets, what is the target? So the UK government target is based on 90% reduction using 1991 as its baseline year. Now, the calculations for your company, your organization, would be a baseline year that if you were looking to do it now, you'd use last year, or if you've if you've added solar, if you've done something already without fully measuring, which is not always the best way to do things, but people like to do what they can from a cost point or the carbon reduction. So then maybe we'd go back 2 years to set your baseline so we could take into account of what you've done. And the idea is, you can see the level is to get the GHG emissions using the CO2 removals, the technology available is to get to that balance. So the timeline and how that balance is achieved is, as you can see here, we're probably just to the left of that long near-term goal, 2030, was set by the government. So they were hoping for the UK to have a 42% reduction in its scopes 1 and 2. So businesses in their day-to-day operation, what they're creating as emissions, we're looking for a 42% reduction. And scope 3, the other 15 factors that you need to look at 25%. Not so much there because they realise that that's a much larger section of your emissions. So a low percentage will equal actually more emission reduction anyway. And as you can see there, the blue bars coming down of the emissions, and the green is the carbon capture technology that will be implicated along the way and used. The anthropogenic human activity. I had to look that one up myself. I don't know who used the word for that on the slide, but yeah. So it's us, what we're doing, and it's what we're doing to create emissions, and then what we're doing to reduce those emissions using the technology that is available to us. So this is a timeline example of similar information there. So you can see right at the top there on the grey line is your scope 3. So it's showing that it's much higher than your scope 1. Scope 2 is still lower, and the gradual reduction of all 3 scopes towards that end target 2050, where 430 should hopefully be 60. So different ways of carbon management, reduction types for carbon management. You've got capital projects, potentially only now looking to be involved in other like-minded companies, and green projects, where you invest in your money, your decision making will change. And this is a good example or reason to have your own emissions being calculated and reported, because investment companies are leaning more towards companies that have these kind of reporting in place. So then you've got the process and design, changing how the company does what it does. So they can change manufacturing processes. Examples are better technology or newer equipment being put in place, which produces less emissions. It's, mainly from a manufacturing aspect, that side of things, but other businesses will have processes in place that maybe they can have a look at to reduce the emissions output there. Behavioural, so the staff's attitude towards carbon and reducing it, how your staff get to work, how they travel around business, the planes, trains, automobiles, things like that, taken into account. Just a better understanding of how the business and what it's trying to do, the staff could be more involved as well. And then you have the procurement side of things. Again, this is something we get heavily involved with the companies, with our procurement expertise. We can help with, you could be more targeting and manage the procurement process a lot better, rather than just being transactional. Oh, we need these. Oh, where'd you get them from last time? Oh, just there, I'll get them again. So you need to look at how you're doing your procurement process and be a little bit more targeted with emission factors involved. Where are they based? How far are they traveling? Is it better to use a local? Is it better to use this one-stop shop that's a bit further away, but they're bringing more things? And, things like that, really, to look at on the procurement side of things. And of course, you're always looking to possibly save money at the same time. And that's pretty much 20 odd minutes of a quick introduction and a little bit of a chemistry lesson there, and the importance of carbon reporting and the measurement and the data involved. So thank you very much. And I suppose, is there anybody got any questions for me or David?
Graham, have we got anything obviously placed or raised in the chat function?
There's nothing in the chat at the moment, but we did have a question, and it was really: would you advise using a consultant or a carbon calculator to measure your carbon footprint?
Okay, do you want to answer that one, David? I'll give my voice a rest for a minute.
Yeah, sure. More than happy to. Thanks, William. Yeah, it depends really. I mean, there's different trains of thought on this. There are calculators out there. They're online. They're free to use. But you won't, as William mentioned earlier on, you won't get verified carbon footprint using an online calculator because, well, the output is only as good as the input. So there's a saying, garbage in, garbage out. If the wrong data goes in, it's not checked. It could be one mistake. It could be intentional. But that'll give you the wrong carbon footprint. And then if you do try to get that footprint verified, the data can't be checked, can't be analysed. So if there is another standard that there's a process that William has mentioned earlier about procurement. PPN 0621 is for public services. You could probably get through public service tender with an online calculator, just about. But if you are looking for any ISO standards or internationally recognized standards, then you really need to work with a consultant who will verify all of the data for you to produce, as William has been indicating through the webinar, a very accurate carbon footprint and reduction plan. So it's horses for courses I suppose a long-winded way of answering the question, but yeah, it's horses for courses. If you just want to get by, you can use an online calculator. If you want it done properly to an international standard, you're probably going to need some help.
Yeah, and this slide here is why the calculator isn't the answer. It's to do with the accuracy, transparency. A calculator doesn't show its workings out. It's that aspect of things, and that's why they can't be verified, because there's no way to know calculation behind the calculator, how it's done it, what is it used to come up with that number, and that's where this 5 principles of carbon accounting come in.
That's excellent. Thank you very much. Ronnie Reed, I think you've just raised a question. If I just unmute you? I don't know if you want to read that aloud.
Hi there. Yeah, just unmuting myself there. Yeah, I think I heard something about the government had reneged on targets for 2030 and pushed them back. I don't know if that's changed under the new government. And obviously, I know a few companies who had many workers working at home during COVID and are now insisting more and more that they come back into the office. I just wondered, is that going to be reflected in any carbon footprint figure for those businesses?
This sorry, do you want me to answer that one, William?
Yeah, go for it.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, the government the one target that everyone is sort of adhering to is the 2050. That's the Paris Agreement, the 1.5 degrees by 2050. Some governments are trying to be more ambitious than others. I'm based in Cardiff and in Wales. They've actually got more ambitious targets set than Westminster. But there's different, and again, as William indicated earlier about the terminology, for instance, the Welsh government is saying net zero by 2030, but what they've actually described as net zero is only scopes 1 and 2, not scope 3, and only for the public sector, doesn't include the supply chain or the private sector. So this is going to be a bit of a moving feast, and as people dig in the weeds of what they're actually going to achieve compared to what they're claiming to achieve, will constantly move. For instance, we saw it with fossil fuels, petrol vehicles, and diesel engines were going to stop being produced 2030. That's now moved to 2035. So yes, you're right. The governments do keep reviewing this. They review their progress. With great intentions at the start, may not be making the progress they wanted to make, therefore they will move the goalposts, but nobody will move the 2050 goalpost.
What about the working from home? Does that affect companies? If you have a number of workers who are actually working from home rather than commuting? I mean, I commuted across the Forth Bridge for 20 years, and then COVID happened, and then I realised I don't need to come into the office. And now, I mean, I'm in the house right now. I maybe go in once a fortnight. I mean, how much is that saving?
It's actually saving a lot, and the government have introduced figures that we do calculate working from home compared to commuting. So there are figures. It's a very simple questionnaire, but you do fill in a form if you are working from home, and that does get included in the carbon footprint, carbon reduction plan. So you're right, working from home does reduce carbon because of the commuting.
Right. So, but everyone's going to need to have some help, some specialist help to calculate this. It's not just a question that you're going to expect the company themselves to have someone working out the tonnage, etc., involved in shipping stuff.
You're right. It's almost, if you look at carbon accounting like cash accounting, most companies will have a bookkeeper, for instance, but then they might go to, say, a PwC or a Deloitte or a second tier accountant to actually get their internal figures audited. That can happen with carbon. We train we've got different levels of people we work with. Some companies, they outsource all of the work to us and other companies. Other companies have got a sustainability manager. Some have got a team. We've been involved in training those teams so they can do it themselves. But again, it goes back to what do you want to achieve. If you want to get an ISO standard, like with 1401 that a lot of companies have on waste and 9001 on quality, you usually bring in somebody to help you achieve that. You don't generally try to get an ISO standard internally without some external help. So yes, you're right. To get one of those standards at the right level, you need some external help.
Okay, that's great. I'll take a note of you guys for future reference. Cheers.
Thanks for your question.
No problem.
All right, thank you very much. I think, Karina, you've got a question as well. If I just allow your microphone.
Yeah, it was just really that was really useful, thank you. But we're working on a lot of guesses at the moment because we're not actually operating yet. So I'm assuming it's still worth us starting the process of reporting and then just kind of making the information more accurate as we get as we have it available.
That actually puts you in a really good position because quite often when, again, in the presentation, when William mentioned about data accuracy, if we go into an established business, usually with things like business travel, perhaps, and expense claims, they're always different. Every business has got its own way of reporting, those things in particular and others. So what you can do is with, say, templates, you can start recording. If you're a new startup, what I understand you said, you're a startup business, you can actually establish the reports so they're good to go for carbon reporting rather than doing something wrong and then addressing it later, which can be part of the first year process. You could avoid all of that by having the correct data available from day one.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense. Thank you.
Sorry about that. My team's decided to do a system restart. Bizarrely.
Whoops. Your camera's frozen, William, but yeah, we can hear you.
Yeah, I don't know what it was doing. There you go. Technology, it's great.
Okay, thank you very much. Any further questions? If you have, just raise your hands. But if not, we can always take questions through an email afterwards, and I can pass those on.
Colin?
Okay, Colin, you're raising your hand. Let me just allow your microphone. There we go.
Just need to unmute yourself, Colin. Still on mute.
Yeah, if you just unmute yourself, Colin, you should have the ability to do that now. If it's easier, you can type it into the chat box.
Can we not unmute him from this end?
I can't. I just tried.
Yeah, I've unmuted him. Might be an issue at his end.
Could be.
Yeah.
We can always put it into the chat, as you say, or take an email afterwards.
Yeah, we can always take an email afterwards. That's no problem.
Oh, Colin's now, I think he went into the chat then.
Yeah,
Oh, there
yes,
is
the presentation, just to answer that, the presentation will be available. What I'll do is I'll be sharing the slides and the recording, hopefully by tomorrow. So I'll get that sent over to everyone.
I think that was Colin's question, wasn't it? Yeah.
No problem.
Yeah, I think Karina also asked that as well, I think.
That's it. That's it. Okay. Well, if there's no more questions, then yeah, anything from you, Clive?
No, other than say, obviously, thanks very much to William and David. What I found really interesting, speaking with the guys prior to this and also going through this again today, is that I think supply chain pressure will force companies to look at this. Not unlike we had in AO, authorised economic operator, which was a government initiative, EU initiative, but actually companies really didn't take that on board until such time their suppliers were saying, or customers saying, right, you need to be AO accredited. So I think that point that William pointed out earlier in the slide deck, that actually, contracts are being lost because you're not addressing the carbon issue within your business and evidencing that. I think that's going to be a significant driver going forward. So I think that's something to look out for, for all our members within their business. Is it? I'm guessing, William and David, this isn't mandatory yet. We've got this 2050 target, but it isn't a mandatory requirement as yet. But there are commercial drivers that should drive you to look at this. Is that
Not for everybody.
Is that right, William?
Yeah, there are some companies, aren't there, David, that are obligated already.
There's a couple of things in play there, actually. That's a very interesting question, Clive, because although it's not a legal obligation as such, we know that PwC and Deloitte are currently in negotiations, or discussions, I should say, with Westminster about carbon tax. So before very much longer, your carbon emissions will be a tax on your balance sheet. So again, it goes back to the accuracy thing that William talked about earlier, that they're already doing it in Denmark. There are figures out there. I believe it's 245 euros per ton of carbon becomes a taxable figure on your balance sheet. So at 25% corporation tax, it doesn't take a lot of working out to see the liability there. So in the next couple of 3 years, there will be tax. So, do it, I suppose, legally binding? No. Supply chain need? Yes. To secure business? Yes. To encourage young people to come in your business as a forward-thinking company? Yes. There's a lot of drivers out there, which none of them are legally binding, but they're all a good reason to get on this journey. And as soon as the tax comes in, it'll save you money as well.
Yeah, great point. Great point. Nothing else from me, Graham.
No, that's fantastic. In which case, I'll get everything shared in the next couple of days. And thank you, David and William, for your time today.
Absolutely, and thanks for everybody else for joining. I think we had 15 online at a given time, or for most of that presentation. So I'm really encouraged by that attendance. So thanks everybody for attending, and obviously David and William for presenting. Really interesting. Thank you.
Great. Thanks for your time.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you all very much.